Hey everybody, Mike Schumann and Seth Tao here for another episode of the East 17th Street podcast. We are recording on Thursday afternoon, December 4th. Seth, is there anything big going on this weekend that you're aware of?
First weekend, December, getting closer to Christmas and Hanukkah.
Summer solstice or winter solstice, maybe? I don't know. Nothing major, right?
Certainly nothing going on in Indianapolis.
Yeah, nothing that I can think of. Obviously, the 2025 Big Ten Football Championship is on Saturday in Indianapolis. We'll get to that. That's our main topic of this episode, but did want to touch on the IU men's and women's basketball team as a quick couple of topics before we get into that. As I said, it's Thursday afternoon. We're immediately on the heels of IU men's basketball's first loss of the Darren DeVries era. Lost their Big Ten opener 73-64 at Minnesota on Wednesday night. And Seth, I would say that was a fairly concerning loss. Not because it's like, the season's ruined, the Darren DeVries era is ruined, but just, the way that game played out. When I watched it, I kept thinking, man, every team in the Big Ten is going to be able to guard Indiana like this. This is a team that is going to have to figure some things out. And for me, it went back to the Incarnate Word game, the Lindenwood game. Incarnate Word was more zone, Lindenwood more switching defense. But the commonality between those games and last night was you focus on taking away Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson, hug up against them on the perimeters, switch everything, all the actions that Indiana's trying to run. You're kind of left with having to either get into the paint off the dribble or dominate inside with your bigs, and I'm not sure that I've seen enough yet to believe that Indiana has that kind of personnel to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this team's being undersized and how that's clearly the big weakness on this team, both in terms of rebounding, which was an issue again last night, and yeah, like you say, in terms of kind of banging in the paint and being able to get your buckets there when teams are defending you like that. And you're right, that we certainly haven't seen enough to feel good about that. And look, I mean, it's clear at this point that Indiana's two best shooters, best scorers are Tucker DeVries and Lamar Wilkerson. And you kind of are just going to need, when you have a night going like last night and they're defending you a bit like last night, it becomes, all right, how many of those tertiary scoring options can you get going? Tatum Connerway did some good things in that aspect last night, and we know that he's capable of being that. But I mean, if they're going to be kind of selling out hard to shut down both Wilkerson and DeVries, you're going to need a little bit more out of guys like, you say like Reed Bailey, Sam Alexis inside. Yeah. You might need a good game from Trent Sisley off the bench. You might need, Connerway to be more of a scoring threat. And I mean, these are things that are, could happen. It's not out of the realm of possibility for Indiana to pull off. And look, I mean, I saw a lot of reaction to the game last night that was way overdoing, where
IU fans, are you kidding? No.
Yeah, just like, yeah, there's things to be concerned about for sure. They didn't look good last night. And if that's a sign of things to come, that's definitely a big red flag. But relax a little bit. It's December 4th. There's still 3+ months to go this season. It's one game in early December. Yeah, you'd like to have won that game. And yeah, Minnesota is projected to be near the bottom of the Big Ten. I will say, I think, the Big Ten would be better off if Minnesota becomes competitive under Nico Medved. So maybe don't poo-poo that, too hard, because that's not a bad thing if Minnesota becomes a more competitive program again. But, there, like you say, there's things to be concerned about, and there's kind of a trend, with the way teams are defending Indiana. But again, it's December 4th. I think there's plenty of time for them to make adjustments and plenty of upcoming opportunities for them to kind of flip the script a bit.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right that like Connerway, Bailey, Alexis, Sisley, like they're going to have to do more. And you would think like that comes somewhat natural to Bailey and Connerway. At least they were guys coming from teams where they were, expected to be big producers. So, I was thinking early in that game, like Conaway was having a breakout, like he was hitting threes, which he's going to have to do. Their teams are clearly going to give him space to shoot threes. Bailey's going to have to be much better finishing inside. I almost wonder at times with the way they're getting out rebounded if Bailey and Alexis are going to have to play more together just to provide more length and have Sicily kind of be your guy that subs those two out. I'm not sure, but we came into the game with rebounding concerns and left with probably even greater concerns because Minnesota's not an especially
Yeah.
big team, and they were missing one of their bigs coming into the game anyway. So it's that aspect was magnified for sure.
Yeah. And the other name that I didn't mention in that group is Connor Enright, who we know can knock down some threes and can be a shooter. But I mean, I feel like it's fair to say at this point, a month into the season, that he's not a guy that looks for his shot very often.
Mm.
And if you're having a game like last night where, shots just aren't falling in general for a lot of the team, and other teams are selling out to keep Wilkerson to force Wilkerson and Tucker DeVries into bad looks. I mean, as much Connor Enright does a lot of good things for this team on both ends of the
Absolutely.
court, but if Wilkerson and DeVries are close to non-factors, I mean, they had
Relatively speaking.
relatively they had 15 points. Wilkerson had 15, DeVries had 9, but if those two aren't playing at the level you need them to, I think you start to wonder, how can you have Enright on the court out there over somebody that can be more of a scoring threat?
Yeah, he played 35 minutes and took one shot, and I think that's hard to do. Like, I asked DeVries a couple weeks ago if guys can be too unselfish, and I'll admit I was thinking about Connor just because every game he doesn't shoot a lot of shots, and that's not necessarily a problem, except when teams are taking away your best options. And I say it as almost a compliment. Like I think he can be a guy that can take 6 to 8 shots a game and just be more productive, be more of a threat, take some of that pressure off the other guys.
Because if teams know that you're not going to look for your shot and you're only going to, if you're left with acres of space, but, if somebody's kind of in your vicinity, that it's almost like playing 4-on-5 offensively sometimes.
Yeah, it's a 30-second shot clock. You got to take a good look when you get it, and I think he'll be pushed in that direction by the staff. I mean, ultimately, like you said, this is not an existential crisis at this point. Indiana has a good staff. They have good players that they can figure this out. But it's going to be interesting to watch because I do think there are some issues that seem like are going to be challenging to figure out, and that the challenges only are going to get greater here. Indiana plays Louisville. The other aspect of the two-step in Indianapolis on Saturday, 2:15 p.m. at Gamebridge, and resume Big Ten play against Penn State. That should be a good opportunity for Indiana, although we thought the same about Minnesota. And then off to Lexington to play Kentucky a week from Saturday. So some significant challenges coming up.
Yeah, and we kind of glossed over the rebounding aspect of all of that last night, but I feel like it's worth bringing up because, like you said, Minnesota's not like the brutes of the Big Ten that you're going to see in January and February. Indiana got out rebounded 40-25 last night, and I felt like Minnesota pretty much had the edge the whole game. They got 10 offensive rebounds. Indiana's played 8 games, I think now. In half of their games so far, they've given up double-digit offensive rebounds. 10 offensive rebounds last night, 14 second chance points, and I mean they lost by 9 points. That was the difference in the game.
Yeah, and I find it interesting, like if you look at the offensive rebound numbers Minnesota had by half, I think almost all of it was in the first half. And I feel like we've seen that before. Like it's almost like, everybody knows it's something they have to focus on. It's an issue for this team, but they almost like have to be reminded of it every game that like, hey guys, you just got dominated in the first half on the glass. So, Louisville has a lot of athletes. Kentucky has a lot of athletes that, Purdue, Michigan, Illinois, like these games could get out of hand purely based on offensive rebounding if they don't get it fixed.
Yeah, and on an earlier podcast when we talked about basketball and how to address rebounding, I asked you if maybe it's just, the the give and take of crashing the boards hard versus kind of getting out in transition, if maybe that's just a risk they're willing to live with. And if that's the case, I mean, that's the risk. If it doesn't work out, this is what can happen.
Yeah, it is. And, I just don't feel like they have like a dominant rebounder like we've seen in years past with like Trace Jackson Davis, Khalil Ware. Like it's got to be all five on deck, being physical. And you're going to give up some transition, which they got nothing in transition last night against Minnesota. Could be partly the reason why, but again, don't want to overcook this right now. We'll see. There's going to be plenty to see in the next week with these games to really know where we're at with this team. Want to flip over to the women's side. They moved up to 8-1 after a win over Western Michigan last night. The one loss being a loss over the weekend to what are they, top 10, top 15 Iowa State team. No shame in that, especially considering they were playing that game without Zania Soka Guman. That's really probably the biggest story in my mind with this team right now is her status. Iowa State has a dominant big that, Indiana stayed in that game despite not having their big. So I thought that was probably a pretty, all things considered, impressive performance by Indiana. But kind of your assessment of where they stand right now after playing some at least one highly competitive opponent.
Yeah, I mean, that defense is such a big thing for Terry Morin and her staff, and so yeah, I mean, it was, you like to see them, I guess, keep it tight and have a good shot, late in the game against Iowa State, and they did. They were right there with Iowa State, but I'm trying to pull up the stats from that now, but I mean, look, Audi Crooks, and Terry said this after the game, that, I mean, she's, one of the best players in the country, really big and just hard to defend for a lot of teams. It's not just going to be Indiana. Even if they had Z, that would have been a problem. Audi Crooks put up 47 points against Indiana in that game. I mean, like I said, defense is so big, and like you can, I think, you can be okay with Audi Crooks getting hers, but I mean, when you're scoring 95 points and losing the game, I think that's got to really irritate Terry Morin. And I mean, they lost 106-95. And I don't know that defense has been a major problem for Indiana so far. It's not like that's the sort of game that they're getting in frequently. But I mean, if you want to talk about, this was their first look against, a ranked opponent, a strong opponent. I mean, yeah, they didn't see, and she would have made a difference. But I mean, you can't get away with defense like that, where you're giving up 47 points to the other team's star player, where you're giving up 106 points to the other team. You're going to lose a lot of games in Big Ten play if you defend like that.
Was that the most points ever allowed in the Morin era? I don't remember them ever giving up 100. If you don't know,
I don't know off the top of my head. It's got to be up there, but
yeah,
I don't know if it's the most.
If there's a good side, and I don't really think that there is, but I'll try to spin it into a good side of not having Z, assuming it's like, I was a little troubled that Terry Morin said week to week instead of day to day. So I think you're, pure guess, but I think you're probably looking at January based on that kind of commentary. Day to day is typically more favorable, but if there's a good side to not having her for the short term, it would be that they need Adesinoyen and Faith Wiseman to develop and get reps, and this is going to provide that opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, January is probably not far off. I mean, I don't know that for certainty, but you look at their schedule, and I mean, they open Big Ten play on Saturday.
Yeah. I'll ask again, is there anything going on Saturday?
They open Big Ten play on Saturday at noon at Illinois. But after that, they don't have, it's all mid-major, low-major type teams that they're playing until Big Ten play picks back up, which for the women's team is in late December. But I think in an ideal world, if Z is missed 3 weeks, you'd probably like to get her a game or two to get her legs back under her. And so, especially because, I mean, Owen Graham was at the game for us last night and pointed out that Z was using a scooter to get around and had a boot on her right foot. So clearly it's, I think somebody from IU may have said it was a lower body injury. It's clearly something with her leg or her foot or something.
Right.
And so, working your way back from that, and Terry said it, talking about it after the game last night, that there's always concern when you're out for several weeks about getting you don't want them to lose their conditioning. So I think ideally if they could get her back, they play Western Carolina on December 21st. That's their last game before Big Ten play resumes on the 29th. I think if you could get her back for that game, you'd at least be able to, get her some run, maybe limited minutes, but just kind of give her a chance to ease her way back into things before you're going up against Minnesota on the 29th. A lot of it is all speculative. I guess what we can talk about with that is how they looked without her. And frankly, last night was pretty concerning. And I don't know how much of that was, and actually Odessa Noyan had maybe her best game with IU. But even so, last night, they just did not play very well as a team last night against Western. Western Michigan was leading this game until midway through the second quarter. And mind you, the game before that for Western Michigan, they lost to a Division II team. They're 1-5 on the season. And Indiana had a very slow start against this group last night. And frankly, I don't know that this is the only game you could say this about, but if Shea Chesky wasn't, channeling, every top dominant IU scorer over the years to kind of put up big numbers for this team through the first month, if she wasn't doing that again last night, you may be talking about, a real barn burner, one possession game at the very end.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be what looks to me like a major challenge on Saturday for them going on the road to play Illinois, a team that is given under Shauna Green's still their coach, right? Since she's came on board, they've kind of given IU some fits with their playing style. And, especially the last couple of years with IU struggling with turnovers and guarding the ball a little bit. They have a common opponent in Florida State. And Illinois was much more convincing in their win at Florida State than Indiana. So that on paper looks like a game that's going to be pretty challenging for IU.
Yeah, you said it. Indiana's always, I don't know about always, but the last several years had trouble with Illinois. And Terry Morin rebuilt this roster trying to get more athleticism on the team and be able to compete better against teams like Illinois. But you start to wonder if they may have given up a little too much on the other end in building up. And obviously there's no ideal, they're not just handpicking and building doing my team, build a team in video game mode or anything. But you wonder if they may have lost too much, in terms of size and in terms of shooting ability and just some of the errors that this team is making left and right, it feels like at times. I am concerned about the Illinois game. I think there's some positive signs, I think, for this team long term. And I mentioned Shea Chesky, and she's been outstanding. All Big Ten, all Big Ten first team caliber. The steps she's taken this season has been tremendous. And Lene Beaumont has looked good at times as well. But it's just this team's got to clean up around the edges if they're going to be competitive.
Yep, agree 100%. So again, that's noon on Saturday. IU men's basketball at 2:15 on Saturday, and then the headliner, 8:00, Fox, the Big Ten Championship, Lucas Oil Stadium. You and I will walk down the street. I think it's about a half mile after we get done covering the basketball game. And that is number 1 versus number 2. We've been anticipating this, talking about this, speculating whether or not it would happen. It is here. It's a rarity. Number 1 versus number 2 doesn't happen a lot in the Big Ten. It doesn't happen a lot in conference championship games. I think it's only 3 times in each of those scenarios. And everything's on the line in this one. The Big Ten championship, the Heisman trophies potentially on the line, not definitively, but a strong performance and a win by one of these quarterbacks will go a long way in deciding that. And not the least of which the CFP bye, number one seed definitively is on the line, and a bye potentially, although I don't think either of these teams will lose a bye unless there's just a disaster sequence. I want to start with that because I wrote about it. I want to get your take on it. The only way I think either one of these teams could lose the bye would be, as I said, complete disaster. Like get blown out, lose your quarterback to an injury that clearly is going to go into January, and have some things in front of you like a win by Texas Tech, win by Georgia, things like that. It almost has to be just like the perfect storm. But I do at least see the possibility, especially for Indiana, to fall to out of the bye. What do you think?
The injury point you make is a good point because obviously we've seen that with the
Mm,
CFP committee in the past. Speaking of Florida State, but I mean, but I outside of something like that happening, because I just don't. Yeah, Georgia Tech, not Georgia Tech, Georgia and Texas Tech are 3-4, and sure, if Indiana got the door blown off, or if Ohio State got the doors blown off, and Georgia and Texas Tech both had convincing wins in the SEC and Big 12 title games, yeah, the other, Indiana or Ohio State could fall below them, but that still would put you at 4, which would
yeah.
still get you a bye, and it just the number 5 in the rankings right now is Oregon. And
Mm,
if it becomes a question of 12-1 Indiana against 11-1 Oregon, I mean, Indiana beat Oregon at Autzen.
right.
You know,
Right.
I always say with some of this stuff that it's hard to predict. The committee, it sometimes feels like just does what they want and make bracket that they want and then finds the reasoning to back it up later.
Right.
So no, you can't ever rule anything out, but I think the only way where I would go into Sunday feeling concerned for Indiana's hopes at a bye would be a blowout loss, and well, even if they got blown out, I think that the score of the game to me doesn't even impact that. To me, it's as long as they get through the game healthy, particularly with Mendoza, as long as Mendoza is healthy coming out of the game, I don't see a way that Indiana loses the bye.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And obviously you want the one. It should present the most favorable draw, but I think if you've got 1 through 4, you're feeling pretty good. You're get what is it, like 25 days off, and you're going to be facing a team that doesn't have that kind of time off, although it didn't necessarily prove out to be the case last year
Yeah.
that the bye teams didn't perform all that great. Sometimes too much time off is a little bit of a concern or an adjustment. I think that'll be a question that I have for Signetti on Sunday. It would be, just like, what do you plan to do with all this time?
Yeah, I've talked about this, maybe not on the podcast, but with other people in passing before about just, obviously last year played out the way it did. And, the 4 bye teams all lost in the quarterfinals, but I don't take that much from it because of the way the bracket seeding changed from last year to this year. You had teams in that top 4 that got byes that were ranked below teams that had to play in the first round because last year the 4 byes went to 4 conference champions. And so
Right.
Boise State got the first round bye and was, straight through to the quarterfinals and then played Penn State. And they were a pretty hefty underdog to Penn State in the quarterfinals. So, Boise State, the 4 seed went down, or were they even the 3 seed? I think they may have been the 3 seed. So, and that, I don't mean that to demean Boise State at all last year. I mean,
It's fair.
but
It
it's
shouldn't have
neither
been
here.
that way. It
It's
was a
neither
good
here nor,
fix by
but
the CFP.
it absolutely is, because now, I mean, and I was going to say, I almost wonder if when they are making this bracket, like say Indiana lost convincingly and Georgia and Texas Tech both had strong wins, even if Indiana is healthy, I almost wonder if they would try to not have Indiana as the 4 and keep them at the 3 if possible, so that then you could have Ohio State, Indiana in the championship potentially versus a rematch in the semifinals. I don't know if that's something they would really consider or think about, but I mean, I guess there's not great there's just not enough data to go off of, with the 12-team bracket and how they make it, and trying to avoid rematches and whatnot. I mean, you had Ohio State rematch Oregon in the quarters last year, but
Right.
I mean, I don't know if they're thinking that way in terms of the top seeds, but I think that's a fair question, frankly, if they would consider putting Indiana at the 4, which would have them maybe playing Ohio State in the semifinals.
The thing I
If they
think
got
that
there.
they think about is keeping their conference constituencies happy. Like, I have a hard time believing that in any scenario, IU, Ohio State, and Oregon would all three get buys. Like, I think somehow they'll find a way to make sure that two of those teams are from other conferences.
I
That's
tend
the
to
thing.
agree.
In those rooms, I think that's the kind of stuff where it gets political, in my opinion.
I tend to agree. I think. I mean, there's just all the different scenarios and things that could play out. I mean, but here's the thing. I mean, if Texas Tech lost to BYU, then BYU probably just takes that bye, because
Mhm.
BYU is currently number 11, but their only loss was to Texas Tech. If they go
Right.
beat Texas Tech in the Big 12 title game, then they probably just jump into the bye.
Yeah. Yeah, so that'll obviously be what we try to figure out in the immediate aftermath of the game. The game itself, I
Oh,
encourage
right. There's
people to.
an actual game.
Well, it's so weird because, like, I'm of two minds of this, and I'm curious how you and the fans think of it, because, like, of course it matters. Of course it matters. You're 12-0. You're going for the first outright Big Ten title in 80 years if you're Indiana. So of course it matters. But there is that bigger prize out there. So it is one of those things where, like, you do think, like, as a fan, like, would you be happy if you won the Big Ten, but Mendoza and, Carter Smith and D'Angelo Ponce and Aiden Fisher all got hurt, and your CFP chances look like they're completely destroyed? Like, which one matters the most? Like, and it goes to a bigger question, is like, what is the meaning of these conference championship games in the era of a 12 and maybe someday 16 team playoff? Those are legitimate questions, and Indiana's facing that right now because they are a legitimate Big Ten title contender and a legitimate CFP contender, and those things are a little bit at odds right now.
Yeah, for sure. And some of it is just the nature of the sport these days, and the
Mhm.
way that everything has just become funneled towards the CFP, and it's all focused on the playoff and getting to the playoff and winning in the playoff, and how that's trumped everything, and just the playoff ranking throughout the season, and how much that's shaped the sport has made the conference championship games, has cast them in a different light than they used to be, no doubt. Um, I think certainly for Indiana, it's not even a question that this matters. I think if it was Ohio State versus Oregon, if it was a rematch of Michigan, Ohio State, if it was, you know, any, insert
Take
football
last
power
year.
here,
Take
right,
last year,
right.
like
Penn State,
Oregon, Penn State. Didn't
Oregon.
feel like it really mattered to either of them all that much.
I mean, it obviously it did matter, and that was a really great game
Right.
if you remember. But
Right. Yeah.
but those teams, like Indiana, just being here is such a big deal for Indiana, and I don't think it's lost on them. Kurt Signetti, we've talked about, and how good he's been at kind of keeping his guys focused, and compartmentalizing and kind of understanding the moments that they're in, but not being afraid of them, and
Mhm.
also focusing on the here and now, not worrying about what's next. It really does mean a lot, I think, to Indiana if they win this game. I mean, just being here, but I mean, winning a Big Ten championship for Indiana football is. I mean, we've talked plenty on here just about the rise of this program and all the firsts since blah blah blah, and just everything that this program has accomplished the last 2 years. But I mean, winning a Big Ten championship would trump all of that. And really just, I mean, that would be one of it would, I mean, it wouldn't be a true bookend because you'd have the CFP coming right up and obviously a chance to win a national title potentially too, or go deep into the CFP, obviously. But I mean, just winning a Big Ten championship would really, really be something special for not just IU football, but IU athletics. I mean, you think back the
Oh yeah.
last 20 years of IU athletics, and I mean, there have been a few championships here and there. And, you think that, the women's basketball won a Big Ten championship, 3 years ago, I think it was at this point. And that was a really big deal then. I mean, it's a similar sort of thing. I mean, that was the women's team's first Big Ten title in 40 years. And for so long, it was a afterthought of a program within the Big Ten. And it wasn't something that people thought could happen until it did. And that's kind of where Indiana football is at right now. Just, winning that game would be a huge deal to Indiana, I think, unquestionably. And for all that lies ahead of them, I don't think that I just don't feel like it's something that's going to be really considered like taking their foot off the gas at all to preserve anything for the CFP.
No.
I think they want to win a Big Ten championship, and the CFP, I mean, you talk about it, if guys get injured, this and that. I mean, we know all too well that injuries just happen in football,
Right.
and you might lose the game and lose from it and lose somebody big to injury. You might win the game and stay completely healthy. I mean, it's just part of the game. I mean, I think the question that IU fans are going to have to ask themselves going into this game, and I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer to it, is, years from now, say Indiana won the Big Ten title game on Saturday, beat Ohio State, and then got upset in the quarterfinals and didn't win a CFP game. How would you think back on this season? And I think most people would say they'll remember it very fondly and they'll carry memories of the Big Ten championship win.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's been 80 years. Like I don't even know if there was 10 teams in the Big Ten. I don't even know if it was called the Big Ten in 1945.
What, you weren't
now
alive?
it's not quite, believe it or not. There's a lot of see all that gray. People might suspect otherwise, but now you're
Sorry,
talking 18 legit question. Now you're talking 18 teams. So whatever the mountain was to climb in 1945 or 67 or all the years in between. Now the mountain is unbelievable. Like when I heard USC and Oregon and Washington were joining the Big Ten, I know I didn't think, oh great, now I just got a chance to win a Big Ten championship. So yeah, I think it'll be so significant that both inside IU athletics and within the fan base, people will be moved to tears if IU wins that game. I mean, 13-0 outright Big Ten champions. That's beyond a lot of people's wildest dreams.
Not to mention just beating Ohio. I mean, it's a big deal just for them if they beat Ohio State. I mean,
just 1988
right.
is the last time that's happened. 30 losses in a row, 31.
Even separate from everything else, just beating Ohio State would be a big deal.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll put off talking about this year's game even further to talk about last year's game because it does. I think it's relevant. Like, Ohio State seems like they're a college football all-star team almost. But I want to run this by you because I've been thinking about it, and I'm afraid I'm too biased to think it. But every time I think about that game last year, the final score is 38-15. Looks like a dominant Ohio State win, but if you really peel that back, Ohio State, that game was tied at 7 late in the first half. I think under 2 minutes to go in the first half. James Evan drops the punt. Ohio State gets the ball at the IU 7 and punches it in very late to take a 14-7 lead at halftime. Then Caleb Downs returns a punt 80 yards very early in the second half. And then Ohio State at the very end of the game punches it in when everybody's expecting them to take a knee. So my contention is, I'm not going to say take those away because like Caleb Downs is a stud and like he can change every game he's in. But my contention is if you just kind of look at the two teams in the trenches, offense against defense, mano a mano, like Indiana was competitive in that game at Ohio State, which they're not going to have to deal with that crowd, although it'll be a ton of OSU fans at this game. And they had a quarterback who we now know had a torn ACL. So if you just kind of, not focus on the score, not do like a box score scouting report, but really think about how that game went. I'm not so convinced that, and I also think Indiana's offense is better this year than it was last year, especially offensive line and especially Mendoza's mobility. I'm not convinced that these aren't evenly matched teams. I think Ohio State is a far deeper team. But starters against starters, I think it's pretty evenly matched. And well, like I said, I'm taking instruction from last year's game to get there. What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think you're off base, really. I mean, I the what happened in the fourth quarter, as far as the analysis last year, doesn't, I'm overlooking all of that because yeah, Ohio State scored a touchdown with 35 seconds left, but I mean, that when Indiana scored a touchdown with a minute 53 left, it was
Right,
the game was over at that point. And not that
right,
Indiana shouldn't have been trying to score, but I mean, it was just like the points at the end of the Notre Dame game. I mean, the game was pretty much over at that
right,
point, and
right.
so yeah, it was 31-7. Going into garbage time, basically, if you want to call it that. But you're right that, I mean, it was a tight game, 7-7, and then I mean that drop punt, the drop snap just changed everything.
It did.
And I mean, it was, two mistakes by James Evans, and you feel bad for the guy because, I'm sure that just weighs on him still. But I mean, between dropping that snap and then his mistake kicking the ball to Caleb Downs, which he wasn't supposed to do, and then Downs ran it back. And I mean, momentum is a really big thing in college football. And,
Yep.
as far as, you brought up last year's college football playoff and how all the teams that had buys lost. And while I don't take much away from that, something I do take more away from the CFP from last year is how big of the home field advantage is, and how difficult it is going to be for anybody that has a road game in the first week of the CFP to go into a hostile environment and win a game of that magnitude, because momentum is just so big
Yeah.
in a game like this, and a couple small things go against you and suddenly you're down 2-3 scores and you're just up against it. And I think you're right that this year the teams do feel a little more evenly matched. I mean, they were pretty close to evenly matched last year, but Indiana's better, I think, than they were last year. Ohio State's really good, but I don't think there's a question to me from what you've seen from these two teams all season, and additionally what you've seen around the rest of the country. I mean, these are the two best teams in college football to me.
Yeah, I think you have to conclude that. I think that's almost universally the case in any polls, analytics, metrics that you see. You've been taking a look at, what to watch for when each team has the ball. When IU has the ball, like, if I feel like they have a weakness, it's when teams kind of bring the house with the zero blitz, and, Fernando's basically got to make a snap decision. He's thrown some picks in that scenario. He hasn't been as good away from Bloomington, and I think some of it's, the continuum in some of those games has been facing a lot of pressure and being forced into some quick decisions. Um, what about Ohio State's pass rush? What about their look, this is an Ohio State team that's barely, what's the most points they've given up this year? I think it was 16. They've just not really been tested, and I just wonder what you think about their pass rush and their ability to bother Mendoza in this game.
Yeah, you're right. Well, I guess you're talking about that is Ohio State's defense, but they also haven't faced an offense like Indiana all
True.
season long, and a quarterback like Mendoza. And I mean, look, I have in front of me like the team. I made it in like my notes app. I wrote down like the team PFF grades for all of their categories, like going head to head here. And Indiana's offense the overall grade, it's the best offense Ohio State's played all season. Indiana's receiving core, best Ohio State's seen all season. Indiana's running game, best Ohio State's seen all season. Indiana's run blocking, best Ohio State's played all season. Indiana's passing game and pass blocking, are good, but Ohio State has seen teams better than that. On the other side, this is the best defense Indiana's played. It's the best run defense Indiana's played. Tackling, pass rush, coverage, Indiana's seen better teams than that. And Ohio State's pass rush grade, you bring that up, they rank 43rd in the country in pass rush grade. I think they were 27th in the country in sacks on the year. And to me, that's where I think if Indiana is going to have a shot to get rolling in this game, and I wrote about this on the site, it's if they're able to, if that's the quote, if they don't, Ohio State doesn't have a weakness, but if that's
Right.
The less strong area that Indiana's able to exploit for and kind of win that matchup, and if they're able to keep Mendoza clean and give him time to operate, then I think the offense is going to have a chance. Now, obviously, Ohio State could bring extra men on the blitz and put Indiana under some pressure, and that's just as much, I think, going to test. It's not only going to test Fernando Mendoza. I think it's going to test Mike Shanahan too, and his play calling and his ability to adjust to that. Because we've seen, think back to the Penn State game and where it felt like too many times we've talked before a few times this season where it felt like I think Signetti has said that they don't give their quarterbacks a lot of freedom at the line of scrimmage, and that, there's been some moments where it felt like, Fernando, like you see 1, 2, 3 extra guys coming, you got to check out of this or call a timeout or something. And they snap the ball anyway, and it's a negative play. And, it may not be Fernando's fault if he's not given the freedom to do anything about it. But that's why I say I think it's going to test Mike Shanahan and his ability to react and respond to what Ohio State is doing and call up some kind of quicker read type plays and get the ball out quicker and get guys open quicker. And that's kind of the chess match that we're looking at here. So, I mean, Caden Curry for Ohio State is really good coming off the edge. Their linebackers, Arvell Reese, really good. So, Sonny Styles, really good. Up the middle, I don't know that up the middle, they're so good. And that's, I think, more so in the run defense and than the pass defense. They're, obviously as a whole, just a great team. I think the pass rush and the pass blocking is where Indiana needs to look at on Ohio State and say, okay, this is the matchup that is going to decide whether our offense is going to be good or bad on Saturday. That's the matchup we need to win. We need to keep Fernando clean, and we need to give him time to operate. And if they're bringing extra guys, we need to scheme around it and get the ball out quicker and make them pay in the secondary for bringing those extra guys.
Yeah, and I would say Indiana's been generally pretty good at kind of recognizing in game what teams are trying to do to them, whether it's take away the pass, take away the run, and having counters to that. But obviously, this is the ultimate test. Ohio State's defense has been elite. They're averaging like 7.8 points allowed per game. Matt Patricia, a ghost from my past as a Steelers fan, probably yours too. But he's come in and just done an amazing job with a great roster. They disguise a lot at the line of scrimmage, and it's going to be the ultimate test, no doubt about it, for Fernando. Don't know if EJ Williams is going to be back for this game. I think he would be very valuable. The emergence of Charlie Becker has been nice, but to have all four of them available in this game, I think would be really good. Nobody's really been able to shut down Indiana's offense in both phases. Like I said, take away the run, they can pass. Take away the pass, they can run. I think Indiana's ability to run the football could be pretty key here, because I suspect if anybody can take both aspects away, it's Ohio State.
Yeah, I think the closest you've seen to a team locking down Indiana's offense in both phases was Penn State, probably in the second half. Obviously until the drive at the end of the game. Right. Indiana had nothing going offensively for most of the second half.
The one thing I'll say about that is they didn't have Elijah Surratt in that game,
Right.
and um, Penn State was doing, as I suggested at the outset, a lot of zero blitz, and to me, Elijah Surratt's your guy in that scenario to win those physical one-on-one press man coverage matchups, and so having him back for this game, I think, will be significant.
Yeah, no doubt. And you're right that EJ Williams just would be one more target. I think what Indiana brings that other offenses can't replicate, not only is it, I mean, how good Fernando Mendoza's been, but I don't know that Ohio State will have seen an offense just with as many different threats at the skill positions as Indiana has, even if EJ Williams can't go. Just obviously both running backs, Hemby and Kalen Black, are threats. But I mean, Riley Nowakowski at tight end has had a career year receiving wise. Elijah Surratt, we know he's a beast. We know Omar Cooper and what he's capable of, obviously. Charlie Becker, you mentioned, has been outstanding since he had to come into the lineup, and he's a real threat. And not to mention just all the other guys, even behind those guys, Holden Stace can come in and catch a big pass. And you think, guys like Jonathan Brady can come in and make a play. And it's just, it's a lot of depth that you have. And some other teams on Ohio State's schedule may have had that at the beginning of the season. But I mean, certainly by the end of the season, I mean, Michigan had a few guys that you could look at, but I don't know if you had that many guys that you would be worried about being, big threats when they're out there on the field, and just as many different guys as, a defense is going to have to keep track of. I don't know. I mean, I think if Indiana can get something going on the ground, like you talk about, it would be huge, huge in this game. I don't know how much it's going to happen. And we've seen games where Indiana just doesn't have a lot going on the ground, and you kind of have to look at Fernando and say, we're going to need him to make a play for us. And,
Right.
Like you said, there we've seen a lot of games. Think back to the Purdue game. I mean, how it was clear through the first quarter that Purdue was selling out just to stop the pass game, and Purdue's not Ohio State, but I mean, Indiana just adjusted and
No, they're not.
started running the ball down their throats. And I mean, that's just what's going to be so big here. And there's a real chance that Indiana's going to have a lot of tough sledding in the ground game on Saturday night. And it may end up being up to Fernando Mendoza, which, I mean, go get the Heisman Trophy, kid.
Right. Yeah, I can think of worse scenarios. Is there anything about Indiana's offense that you may have been expecting to see this year that you haven't really seen, that you think maybe they've been holding back for moments like this? The one thing that I've thought all season, and you mentioned him a few minutes ago, is I thought Holden Stays might be like a vertical threat in the offense. We've seen him make some catches, but they've been more short check down type passes. He's got a couple touchdowns, but I really thought like Holden Stays, because of how big he is and because he's got some speed going down the seam, would be something that would be part of the offense. Is there anything else that you think of that you thought maybe you'd see more of?
I mean, I guess going into the season, I was expecting to see more rotation at wide receiver based on what we saw last year and the way they rotated through the receiving core. It became pretty evident early on that this year was different than last year. They weren't going to be doing that. So while you've seen, I mentioned Jonathan Brady, obviously, you had Mekhi Jackson at the beginning of the season. You don't anymore. Right. But I mean, between Jonathan Brady, I mean, Charlie Becker was in that group before. He's kind of put himself into that top group in the offense at this point. I mean, with Brady and like LeBron Bond, like I thought we were going to see a little bit more run out of those guys. And frankly, at this point, you see them get a few snaps. It's not like they're not seeing the field, and those guys could definitely see the field on Saturday. Would it shock me if they rolled out some sort of gadget play with one of those guys? I don't know if it would. I mean, it would probably be pretty surprising. I don't know if it would shock me to my core or anything, but I can't say that I'm expecting or I see a reason, I guess, to have been holding on to LeBron Bond in your back pocket only to roll him out for the Big Ten championship game.
That would be good.
At this point, I think you got what you got at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. Let's talk about when Ohio State has the ball. Julian Sayin, quarterback, as I mentioned, clear contender for the Heisman Trophy. Um, an embarrassment of riches at wide receiver with Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate as the top two threats, but they've got other weapons that they look to if you try to key in on them. Kurt Signetti's comments on, I can't remember if it was Sunday or Monday. He did press conferences both days, but his comments were interesting because he felt like watching the film that this is an Ohio State team that really hasn't been tested, and they've probably been holding back, to that point. I asked you about IU's offense. He felt like Ohio State's been holding back when they have the ball. They've been in control of almost every game they've played and really haven't had to do much in the second half. Um, so if you're an IU fan, you don't want that scenario. You want a highly competitive game that's tight the whole way, and you really put a lot of pressure on Julian Sayin to make tough decisions and really be in the spot where he's got to show that he can come through in big moments.
You're on point with that. I think it felt they were down. They went down 6-0 to Michigan last week, and that to me really felt like the first kind of adversity that Ohio State has faced in game. Probably, I mean, I guess you go back to Texas in week 1 and they had to, I think Texas was up 7-0 if I'm not mistaken. And maybe I'm wrong. It's been so long since
I think that
that
was
game.
14-0 and Texas scored very late.
No, you're right. So when they went down against Michigan last week, that felt like the first real adversity that you put Julian Sayin up against it a little bit and said, okay, like we kind of need you to go do something now for us and go get us back into this game. And even then, I mean, obviously, Michigan had to settle for 2 field goals out of that, and could have been a lot worse. And you credit to Ohio State's defense for that, but I think absolutely right. When you watch Ohio State a lot of the year, and that's not to say that they haven't looked good and haven't played well and clearly, I mean, they've elevated themselves to, they're clearly one of the best 2 teams in college football this year. That said, when you've watched them, it does feel like, you don't see everything all the time about this team. It does feel like maybe they're holding some cards close to their chest. And that's kind of scary if you're Indiana.
Yeah, and to your point about Michigan, like if you're Indiana, you don't want to be kicking field goals when those opportunities present themselves. Like, and we've talked about this periodically on the podcast. Kurt Signetti being a little bit conservative, a little, he was in games last year punting against Notre Dame, maybe when he shouldn't have. And there's been other scenarios. Like I think if there's any question, go for it on 4th down, go for a touchdown over a field goal. Because, Ohio State showed in that Michigan game what happens if you don't fully capitalize on your opportunities.
It's like my old baseball coaches always said, you want to go down swinging, you never want to go down looking.
Yep, absolutely. If we're sitting together on Saturday night, remind me to stop watching the ball and just focus on D'Angelo Ponds against Jeremiah Smith going one-on-one, because that is such a fun matchup. Those are 2 All-American players, 2 future NFL players, 2 former high school teammates, which is just hilarious to think about. And two guys that are leaving aside what Jeremiah Smith did with his gesture at Michigan, generally pretty professional, pretty quiet, just going about their business, elite players. That's going to be so much fun to watch those guys battle.
Yeah, D'Angelo Ponds is pretty understated because he just there's not a lot of plays that he has to make. It feels like maybe once every other week, but it's just because he does his job so well that the guys aren't throwing at him that much. He's not letting guys get open all that much. And when somebody throws at him and they get a catch, I mean, he just drops guys pretty quickly. So he's obviously, a quiet person as well. But I mean, you're right. That head-to-head individually is probably, I mean, the most intriguing, fascinating, entertaining individual matchup, when it's Ohio State's offense against Indiana's defense.
Yep. And Ohio State, Of all names, has a running back named Bo Jackson. He's not that good, but he's pretty darn good. Tight end Max Clare, former star at Purdue, is a really big weapon that they look to a lot. Just like I said at the outset, Ohio State's a little bit like an all-star team. It feels like they've got weapons everywhere, no real weaknesses. Going to be, both teams' toughest test of the year. Going to be a lot of fun to
Yeah.
watch. Anything else you want to talk about when Ohio State has the ball?
Well, I don't know if we've mentioned the name Carnell Tate yet, but we probably should because
Yeah.
he's also really good. And as entertaining as it's going to be between D'Angelo Pons and Jeremiah Smith, assuming that it's those two going head to head, what could really determine how this game goes for Indiana is how well Jamari Sharp can do against Carnell Tate.
Yep. Yep. No doubt about it. I think Sharp's improved a lot, but there's certainly been moments this year for him that haven't gone so well. So I'm sure Ohio State's, that's something they've got their eyes on as well.
But this is Indiana's defense is the best, like almost top to bottom that, as far as when you look at the PFF grades, the best Ohio State's seen in almost everything. Overall, run defense, tackling, coverage is the best Ohio State has gone up against this season. Indiana's pass rush is the second best that Ohio State has faced this season. And the only one that's been higher than that was Texas in week 1. So, across the board, it's the best Ohio State's gone up against or best since, August. And
yeah,
it's just as much as you can look at, the talent on both sides and what they've done up until this point this season, there's an element of all of this that's a little hard to know just because neither of these teams have seen an opponent the caliber of which they're going to see on Saturday. So there's only so much you can glean from all the numbers without knowing how they're going to show up against an opponent like that.
Yep. It'll be interesting to see how Bryant Haynes goes about just general approach. Does he try to bring the house against Sayin, or does he try to make him sustain like 12, 15 play drives? Probably a mix of both, but so many cat and mouse games, so many X's and O's that are just going to be fascinating to watch. Special teams, I mentioned it was probably the biggest decisive area of the game last year. To this point this year, I don't think Indiana's really had any major special teams issues. In fact, I would say it's been very much a net positive. You think back to D'Angelo Pons with the block punt against Illinois. They had multiple block punts early in the season. Nico's been perfect on the season. Punting game's been a little iffy at times, at least as the actual punting, not the coverage necessarily. As I mentioned, Caleb Downs could certainly change this game with a big return. So, Indiana, it's hilarious. I did a double take at Purdue the other night. I'm sure he's been out there all year, and I just haven't noticed. But Aiden Fisher was out there on the punt coverage team, and I'm just like thinking, my God, like they probably more than Ohio State have their starters out there in those situations, and I'm sure that's going to be the case on Saturday.
Yeah, it's always been that way with this staff the last couple of years. Just clearly, they value special teams and are not afraid to put their star players out in those situations for better or for worse. You're right that Caleb Downs is going to be a threat in there. I think Brandon Innes is their punt returner, if I'm not mistaken, for the most part. So, you could have to look at him. Jonathan Brady for Indiana as well. Easy to forget at this point. He did have that one punt return for a touchdown early in the season, and he has looked dangerous on the punt return at times this season. Jonathan Brady's 5th in the country in punt return average this season. He's 17.5 yards per punt return. That's a threat for Indiana. You're right that the punting game, at times hasn't been ideal. In fairness to Indiana with that, they had, Mitch McCarthy was injured for a little bit.
Right.
And, I thought Quinn Warren handled himself pretty well in place of him. But even when Indiana's needed it, particularly, the one game I think Indiana had to really, really, really be locked in special teams was at Iowa because Caden Weegan is so good, their returner. And Indiana locked it down that day.
Yep.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, Brendan Frankie has been out for a while for Indiana now too. I mean, Quint Warren, as I mentioned before, has been doing the kickoffs. That could be a factor. I don't know where Frankie is as far as his health and return. I mean, Nico has been great, but I mean, even earlier in the season, we still saw Kurt Cignetti have some hesitance putting Nico out there on long field goals. And it's going to be really interesting to see if Frankie is not available, to see what Cignetti does if that sort of situation arises.
Yeah, it's a great point about Frankie, both long field goals and kickoffs, because Indiana's percentage of kickoffs going for touchbacks has declined significantly, and it only takes one of those that come back the other way to completely change the game. So, great point there. I guess, are you ready to make a prediction about this game?
I guess.
I reserve the right to change my mind. My final prediction always goes on the site when I do the game preview. Well, let me at least start with giving you a sense of what I'm thinking score wise. Something like 24-21. I think it's going to be relatively low scoring. I think both teams will try to make the other sustain long drives. I think both teams will have their moments, but I don't think this is a case where either offense just dominates this game. I think the opposing defenses are just too good. So I think 24-21. I'm gonna say Ohio State right now, but I reserve the right to change my mind. The prediction that I put on the site tomorrow on Friday will be the final, but that's kind of where my head's at right now.
I think I agree with you as far as scoring. I pulled up the betting line and numbers in case, just to reference that, since we haven't mentioned it yet. I actually haven't looked at this in a few days, and the numbers moved towards Indiana. I think it was +5 when it opened on Saturday night or Sunday, and Indiana is now +4. So Ohio State is a 4-point favorite, and the over/under is 47.5. Which is a low total, especially for this Indiana team. I think I agree with you in terms of it's going to be, I expect a lower scoring game, both because the defenses are good and also because I can see Ohio State approaching this offensively in a way that they want to put together long drives and sustain long, you say like the defense is going to challenge the other team to do that. I think Ohio State may want to do that and want to kind of put together one of those 8-10 minute drives that chews up a lot of clock and keep Fernando Mendoza off the field and kind of keep the game within their control that way. So I too expect it to be a lower scoring game. I think I've talked myself into Indiana winning this, though. I think which I'm not sure if you expected me to say or not, but
no, I didn't.
I think I'm score wise, I would probably say something similar to you, but I guess I'd say maybe 27-20 Indiana. I guess I'd say, which might be a little more high scoring than we're letting on, but that's, still relatively low scoring, with some of the numbers we've seen these teams put up. I think for me, both these teams are so great, and it wouldn't surprise me if either of them beats the other. And I don't know if it would really, there's not a lot I think that could surprise me as far as the outcome of this game. I think where it comes down to for me is, we talked about this with Ohio State, that they've only had kind of really small mini moments of adversity this season. And I mean, obviously they won the national championship last year, so they know what it takes. They, have a lot of guys that have been on that stage and are not, know how to kind of overcome adversity to get there. But at least within this team and this season, they just haven't had their backs against the wall very much. I don't know how they're going to respond if Indiana finds a way to get up 14-0, early second quarter. I don't know what I'm going to see from Ohio State and how they're going to respond to that. And just the fact that this is, so far and away the best team Ohio State has played all season. I think Indiana has actually had a tougher schedule than Ohio State overall. Yeah. Ohio State had the non-conference game against Texas, but and that's harder than anything Indiana saw in non-con, obviously. But I think Indiana's Big Ten schedule was tougher than Ohio State's was. And I think both the combination of Ohio State has not had to overcome that much adversity and, hasn't been tested in that way. And on the other side, I mean, we have seen Indiana respond to adversity time after time after time this season. They've had big moments, big spots, tight games late in the fourth quarter where, they were on the ropes a little bit. They were staring down the barrel of losses multiple times. And obviously some might see that as a bad thing, and a reason, they almost lost to so-and-so. Ohio State's going to crush them. To me, I mean, Indiana's good. We know, I've said plenty of times, we know how good these two teams are. Indiana, to me, there's just nothing that shakes this Indiana team. There's no mountain that is, at least from what we've seen, there's no mountain that's too big for this team to climb, no moment that's too big for them. And I think based off of that, I don't know that this is going to be an IU team that either comes in scared, comes in with their tail between their legs, or deer in headlights look of, I don't know that this is a team that's going to, if Indiana finds itself down 10-0 in the first quarter, I don't know that they're going to panic. And I think I trust Indiana to respond and get back into the game and find a way to win the game at that point. And so I guess that's why I've talked about, why I am leaning towards Indiana in this matchup. Both teams might have little small mini cracks that you could see exploitable. There's not that much difference in these teams overall, unless you really, really squint. I think just that meant all the mentality that I've mentioned from Indiana and the way that, they've seen every type of game this season. They've been in a high scoring game. They've been in a low scoring game, rock fight. They had to pull off that drive at Penn State to win the game at the very end. They, pretty much escaped Iowa with Iowa missing that field goal and then turning around and getting the clutch play from Elijah Surratt. They went into Autzen and did what they did at Autzen. This team is so battle tested. I think I like Indiana to pull this off.
I mean, I can't disagree with anything that you're saying, and no outcome will surprise me other than just a complete blowout by either team. I think I might have been leaning towards Indiana like you, but I was really impressed by Ohio State's game at Michigan. Just what you're saying, the way they responded to adversity. Now, Michigan wasn't in a position to capitalize on the early opportunities, as we said, like I think Indiana can. But I was more skeptical of saying going into that game than I am now, and that's kind of what's got me leaning towards OSU a little bit. But I like we're saying, 24-21 either way kind of feels like the way this thing's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Julian Sain's great, Heisman favorite, but I mean, Indiana has seen quarterbacks, not that are, at Sain's top level per se, but I mean, when Indiana went out to Autzen, I mean, Dante Moore was playing at that type of level, and Indiana,
absolutely.
And I mean, he connected on the one long touchdown, but other than that, I mean, Indiana did a really good job against Dante Moore, and he kind of hasn't been the same since. I mean, Luke Altmaier had a little bit of that sort of hype, maybe not the production to match it up yet when Indiana played Illinois back in September. And I mean, I like I said, I think Indiana's just seen it all this season.
Yeah, if Indiana's defense can play like they did in the second half at Autzen, all bets are off. And I think we can leave it right there. Like we said, we're expecting a great game. We've got a lot to look forward to this week ahead of that game, and we'll have it all for you at the Daily Hoosier. He is Seth Tao. I am Mike Schumann for the East 17th Street podcast. We will catch you guys all on the other side of an exciting weekend in Indianapolis.